This one we're going to focus on fat loss through exercise. And like I said with diet, burning fat's important and it's fun and it's healthy, but you don't want to just burn fat and then at the consequence of the rest of the body going downhill, right? So the whole thing is, how do you do this stuff but still improve overall health in the process of it? And exercise is a really big one like this. I've done this many times. Back in the day, I used to compete for Canada for karate, so I had to play with my weight up and down, and I'd be up at 170, and then I'd have to go down below, like closer to 150, and I'd have to kind of fluctuate. So I had to play with all of this stuff a lot. But a lot of times, it was like you can burn fat fast in certain ways, but not necessarily in a healthy way for your body. And you set your body up for injury and for strain, sprain injuries, and all sorts of stuff down the road. Really, you can create a lot of inflammation that we'll talk about. So my goal with all of this is, how do we do it properly so it works long term and that our bodies get healthier in the process? Because, you know, I'm 45 and it's like, as I'm getting older, I don't want to run into more and more wear and tear problems as I go along. So how do you kind of keep everything running smoothly? Okay, so when we look at some of the fundamentals, basically, you got to work with diet and nutrition. If your diet and nutrition is horrible, you will have a hard time burning fat, and you will definitely have a hard time optimizing overall health. You will set yourself up for inflammation, which is kind of the root to just about every chronic disease problem there is. And so I'll talk briefly kind of what that means, but you can look at the other lecture and it'll break that down in more detail for you. And then when we look at exercise, we really have to break down several pieces. We have to look at what aerobic exercise actually means. And a lot of people, I can tell you right now, probably 95% of the population does not do aerobic exercise properly. Strengthening, we have to do some degree of strengthening. I love to incorporate something like sprints, which is more of like a high intensity. But the key is that you have to do these things in the right ratios, or you will set yourself up for problems. Incorporate play, which means challenge your body to move in different ways. Be childlike. Like Tay and I would often do a class once in a while that was more just fun movements. You do like old school stuff, like even things like skipping and crossing your body in different ways and doing different types of exercises to challenge it to move in different ways. It's also fun, and it turns on the part of the nervous system that we ultimately want to help us with not just burning fat, but overall health. And we have to have ample rest periods. Now, some people might be thinking, I already have way too many rest periods, but you're going to find a spread on that. Some people do not rest enough, and then we tend to move into injuries again. And if there's anybody that does more like longer distance cycling or running or something along these lines, most of the time they don't do enough of this, and they set the stage up for inflammation and breakdown of tissues. And it's hard. I know. I used to do this stuff. I used to do triathlons. I used to get into all of that and totally blew my body apart in many ways. Hey there, come on in. Grab a seat. Good, good. And then consistency. So not that we have to be like regiment on a schedule all the time, but it's like we have to incorporate these things within our lifestyle. Okay? So the whole thing is, I don't have any specific routine. If anything, my routine's completely shot after having like a newborn who's 10 months now, and another one on the way, and a 12-year-old stepson. So it's like, it gets a little bit crazy, but the fun part is figuring out how to play with it. And when you start to really introduce this into a lifestyle rather than a structured plan that you might read in a book, it becomes more fun, right? And you actually can play with it in a lot of different ways. So diet and nutrition. So the thing that I think helps the most, and I don't necessarily do all of this 100%, I will cycle in and out. There's sometimes if I want to get really lean, I will really stick to all of these strategies very specifically. If I'm kind of not, if I got too many other things on the go, I adopt certain of them, maybe about 80%, but I'm not necessarily doing everything the way I should. But it depends on what my goals are and how I'm feeling. Number one, we need to become fat adapted. So does anybody know what I mean when I say fat adapted?
Eat more fat.
Eat more fat. It means that we want to train the body to burn fat as its primary fuel source. Most people do not burn fat as their primary fuel source. Even when you actually see marathon runners, how many people have seen people lined up to do long distance races that actually have a fair bit extra fat on them? How is that possible? We're putting in hours of training and still often have a hard time losing weight. Well, that is because they are not fat adapted. They are likely, and I'll get into this more when we talk about aerobic exercise, but what happens is they've trained their body to actually become very efficient at burning sugar. And the body much prefers to burn sugar or stored sugar or even proteins before it likes to burn fat. So the key is, how do we get to become fat adapted? Part of this, and I'm going to show you a really cool study that was done a while ago that breaks some stuff down. Most people generally eat a little bit too high carbohydrates and a little bit too low fat. That's been the general trend over the last probably 50 years, has been a low fat diet. And it generally starts to become a higher carbohydrate diet. So to become fat adapted diet-wise means we need to give the body a higher percentage of healthy, beneficial fats that I talked about in the other class, lower levels of carbohydrates, and when you do, and that varies a little bit depending on people's exercise and gender and all this type of stuff too. You can fine tune it. Lots of vegetables and moderate amounts of protein, not high proteins either. Okay, mostly it's like fat is your cleanest burning energy supply. If you think of fats as being like your solar energy, wind energy, producing energy, and you look at sugars as being more like coal burning, okay? In the body, if you are burning sugars more regularly, you will set your stage up for inflammation in all sorts of aspects of your health. If your body becomes more efficient at burning fats, you will do the opposite. So we want to try and tap into our fat stores. And we've all got them. We've all got access to fat. We just have to figure out how to tap into it regularly. So diet-wise, you want to try and start to bring your carbohydrates down. Okay? And so by carbohydrates, first I look at cutting out a lot of things with grains, because that's a big carbohydrate. Starchy vegetables for a little while. I would try that and I would see, how do you feel when you're doing it? They would recommend usually trying to get below 150 grams of carbs a day. So you can play with that. I don't really count carbs or count calories, but I have a general idea after a while of what I'm eating and the amount of ratio of carbohydrates that I'm taking in. And when I'm being strict, I'm on a very low carb diet when I'm really trying to dial it in. They'll actually go from here to get into a ketogenic type of a diet, which means that you're really solely kind of burning pretty much fats all the time. You have to usually be low about 50 grams. Okay, which can be quite tricky. Now, 150 grams, not really that hard to do, I don't think, if you really sort of keep your eye on it and you incorporate some other things like intermittent fasting.
I'm sorry, Jason, when you say lower carbs, like any kind of carbs?
Carbohydrates.
Okay, but anything.
Fruits, grains, starchy vegetables. A carb's a carb. Now, there's definitely better carbs than refined carbs. And as a whole, I would say, try and get rid of most refined carbs anyways, other than once in a while, not a big deal. But for the most part, we shouldn't really be having much of those anyways. Everybody know what I mean when I say refined carbohydrates?
What about net carbs? Like, is it net, like when you minus the fiber out of it? Is that better even?
You're definitely better with more fiber because you're not really burning them, so I wouldn't count the fiber initially.
So then you can actually have more than 150.
Yeah, but I would initially, I would stop it at 150 period, and I would see how you do. And then once you get a baseline, then I always play to see for the individual what still works. My bottom line is really what's the minimal amount people need to do to get the maximum amount of benefit. So if I can get away with having 200 carbs a day and I like the feeling in my body, I'm going to do that because that's great. It's more or less, is it working for me or not, right? But the main thing is that too many carbs are going to lock you into a pattern of fat storage, inflammation, increased oxidative damage, nutrient deficiency, and delayed recovery. When people are having too many carbohydrates on a regular basis, it is hard to not be in an inflammatory state. Because the breakdown of sugars, all carbohydrates get broken down into glucose, okay? And then glucose gets turned into energy. But that process of turning glucose into energy is a bit of a dirtier fuel. So we create a lot of oxidative stress, which is what we call free radicals. So has anybody heard of antioxidants? We take antioxidants to bind and quench free radicals. Free radicals are like a mugger. They go around from cell to cell and they create damage and they steal an electron from it and create damage, right? Antioxidants are missing. They're like a charity. They actually come and grab the cops, they would actually grab the mugger, bind it up and put it back in jail so it can't do any more damage. So that's why we take things like antioxidants, which come from primarily lots of vegetables in our diet and some fruits. But carbohydrates are okay. It just has to be in the right amount, right? And the problem is that most people's diet has way too many of them. I also think in general, I talk about this in way more detail in the other lecture, but get rid of problematic foods. So really we should be getting rid of unhealthy oils, okay? So when I say healthy oils, what comes to mind for people? Coconut oil, avocados, olive oil, good. Should only be done raw though, not cooked with. Yeah, healthy nuts and seeds.
Why not cooked with?
Because it will oxidize and will go bad fairly quickly. The problem is that the worst oils to have are almost all of your vegetable-based oils. The process in them oxidizes almost all of your oils. So when you are making canola oil or even flax oil, most of the time you've damaged the fats in the process of doing that. Now, flax can be very beneficial, but you wouldn't do it as an oil. You would take it as a whole seed and then maybe grind it right before you use it to try and preserve the integrity of the fats. Grass-fed butter, it's a good fat. If people are okay, if people aren't vegan, then I would definitely incorporate grass-fed butter. Just a side note on people that do, is anybody here more vegan-based? Like, doesn't eat any animal products? The one thing I find, I've ran several tests where I'll look at a fatty acid profile, and I have found countless times that people that are vegan that aren't having any omega-3s that would be from, say, fish or that sort of end of it, are extremely inflamed. Their profile is the complete opposite to what it should be. And I've seen that countless times. So they have to incorporate, because flax and chia and these ones will not give you enough omega-3s that you need. You'd have to have about a gallon of it in order to equal about a tablespoon of fish oil by the time it converts. Just a side note. And then incorporate periods of intermittent fasting. Has anybody tried this?
I do it all the time.
Yeah, good.
You know, from the Jan 22nd, I lost 14 pounds from doing the elimination thing.
Perfect, yeah. So in the first one, we talked about the elimination type of diet, taking out your top 7 allergenic foods. So awesome. And you probably feel good. Like, I mean, it's because it takes a lot of inflammation out. We stop storing excess fluid most of the time, right? Intermittent fasting is great. What I like about it is at first, it makes it easier to keep this down because you're not eating as much. You're giving yourself periods of time for your body to get used to burning fat as a fuel. If you don't give it anything, and you make it have to use fats, it will start to become more efficient at burning fats and using fats as an energy source. So a good recommendation would be 16 to 18 hours of fasting. So say you finish your meal at dinner at 6 o'clock. By 6 o'clock the next day, that's 12 hours, okay? By 10 o'clock, that's 16 hours, or by noon, that's 18. You could have lunch. So it's like trying to hold off your morning meal, really. Once you get used to it, it's not a big deal. And you can often even go like 24 hours once in a while to do a fast, which has a lot of longevity benefits.
Does the coffee count in there?
Yeah, you can do the bulletproof coffee as a bit of a hack for the intermittent fasting, because all you're giving, is anybody familiar with bulletproof coffee? It's coffee with a bit of grass-fed butter and a specific type of oil that's a medium-chain triglyceride, an MCT oil. When you do that, you kind of trick your body because all you're giving it is beneficial fats, which keeps your body in a fat-burning metabolism. So you're still burning fats, but it turns on hormonal pathways that completely keep you satiated. There's a lot of times where I'll do a bulletproof coffee first thing in the morning and I won't eat until dinner. I might fast all day long sometimes, which every once in a while is a really good thing to try and do, like a 24-hour fast.
And how often do you do that?
I do that daily. That's a part of my lifestyle because I love it. I find, well, other than if I'm on vacation, I just go along with vacation. That's part of social health. But it's like outside of that, if I'm in a routine at home, I love intermittent fasting. I just find for me it makes my life easy. I'm not a big hungry person in the morning anyways. And if you do decide to have a meal and mix it up, try to have a meal that is still primarily more higher fats, moderate protein, probably no or very low carbohydrates first thing in the morning. So that kind of falls into the diet nutrition piece of it. Exercise downfall. So some of the stuff that goes wrong with exercise becomes stressful to the body and we create inflammation. Anybody know anybody that does lots of chronic cardio and has chronic strain sprain injuries? They're always injuring their back, they've got tendonitis, they're doing something else. Happens all the time. You start to create lots of injury to the body. I mean, you can even progress that to not just muscle, tendon kind of injuries, but really people that are doing a lot of chronic cardio not in the right aerobic zone will actually set themselves up for heart problems. They actually start to create like micro tearing in the heart, the same as we do when we create micro tearing in muscles. But you actually get scarring that can come on, and it can set you up for problems. We're going to talk about the black hole. This is where the vast majority of people fall into. It's training at a heart rate that is not slow enough to be aerobic, and you're on the cusp of just getting into anaerobic, which we'll talk about, which means you turn your body into very much training it to burn sugar all the time, and you're not training it to burn fat. So you're screwing yourself because you're basically setting it up to constantly, and you're actually modifying genes to make it even more efficient for you to stay burning sugars. And we'll talk about that. And you lead to injury, exhaustion, fatigue, and both physical and nervous system burnout. So this is a neat topic. So we know that people can get physically kind of burnt out, but being at a higher amped up state for chronically will start to burn out the nervous system a little bit too. And then we start to find even focus starts to drop. We're tired, we're lethargic, all these different things that start to happen. So the benefits when you're doing it properly, you can easily reduce body fat and keep it off even during periods of reduced training, especially if you are incorporating a fat adapted type of a lifestyle with diet. You start to reprogram genes to burn fat instead of sugar. I love this concept because this all falls into epigenetics. And I love this whole field of epigenetics has come up really over this last 5 years. There's been tons around it. And this is basically looking at what can we do through diet and lifestyle, meditation, yoga, how we manage stress, how we live life, and how we interact with our environment, how that affects our genes. We used to think that what our genes had was written in stone and then we were stuck. If our parents had certain things and passed on to us, well, too bad, you're stuck with that too. They found out that it's really not the case. I mean, it's a very small percentage, like around 5 to 7% of our genes that are actually written in stone. Most of it is influenced by epigenetics, meaning if I do certain things, I can change the way that that gene expresses itself. So I can turn on certain pathways or I can turn off certain pathways. So the whole goal is how do we turn on more pathways that support health and turn off the pathways that are going to promote disease. And exercise is a massive one. Managing stress is a massive one. It's amazing how many things get changed when we start to just incorporate those pieces. You avoid overtraining, burnout, illness, and injury. Improve your balance and stress and rest, both in training and everyday life. Spend less time exercising, get more return on your investment. I love that idea. I can honestly tell you, when I see people that are having troubles with weight management, and they are the ones in the gym 6 days, 7 days a week, working their ass off, and they're still not able to burn fat, it is incredibly frustrating. So, and to try and tell these people you actually need to do less and do it differently, it's tricky. I don't know if anybody's ever been there, but when you get in your head about exercising in a certain way and get attached to that, to try and change it feels like you're not working. Feels like you're not earning it. So that's, which is neat because it really is, that's a lot more psychological than anything. Have more fun and be more spontaneous, better energy, mood, and more focus when we start to do all of this properly. Aerobic exercise. The key thing to take home from this is that we usually need to move slower than what we think we do. So I'm going to use this as an example of like running, okay? Not that I think running is the best exercise to do, but it can be a good exercise for people. Whether you're running, whether you're cycling, swimming, doing yoga. The key is that usually this is achieved, the right zone is achieved at a slower, low intensity. Fat is the primary fuel when we are moving slow enough that we have ample amounts of oxygen. So as soon as we start to feel like we're a little bit too much out of breath, we're probably getting out of the fat burning zone and we're getting more into a sugar burning zone. You want to have lots of oxygen available and minimal stimulation to the anaerobic energy. When I say anaerobic and aerobic, aerobic means that we are using oxygen to help us burn fat. Fat requires oxygen to burn it. Okay? Sugar can use oxygen to burn it, but it also can burn without oxygen, which means anaerobic. Okay? A byproduct of anaerobic metabolism is lactic acid. Anybody ever feel the burn? That's lactic acid. When you are feeling the burn, you are in a sugar burning phase. Okay? Now that is actually totally beneficial.
Burn in the muscle?
Well, you're getting lactic acid buildup and then you feel it. So if I were lifting weights, yeah.
You're talking about the burn in the muscle.
Let me stand there and do this for a little while. Okay? Eventually, you're going to feel the burn. And what the burn is because you are now burning sugar and you are creating a lactic acid byproduct, which is what literally starts to make you feel burning. Okay? Now, there's a total place for that, but the problem is that if people are doing chronic kind of cardio where they are in that state of hitting this too often, chronic stress like that to the body is a problem. Intermittent periods of it can be very beneficial. Also, if you're doing this properly, it puts you into your parasympathetic part of the nervous system, which is that rest and digest part of the nervous system, and takes you out of the fight or flight part of the nervous system, which is that sympathetic nervous system. So this is where we're supposed to be living. Okay? Most people don't anymore. Most people live in this. And if we hooked everybody up to a heart rate variability monitor and tracked where we are, you would find that most of the time, most people are probably sitting in this. I actually do this sometimes is I will hook people up to that and let them see over the course of a day, where are they spending most of their life. When we are doing aerobic exercise properly, we're stimulating this part. As soon as we start to go into anaerobic, we get into this part. Now, there's pluses to getting into this for brief periods of time, but not long term. When you're in aerobic, you are primarily burning fat. That is the main source of energy that we are using. And I'm going to talk about a study called a FASTER study that was done that was revolutionary. Don't exceed 65% of your max heart rate. So the formula that I would use would be this one. And this is done by Dr. Maffetone. He's a PhD in exercise physiology. Brilliant guy. You've heard of him. He's probably the father of how to incorporate sort of a fat-adapted world into exercise, and working particularly with endurance athletes. So he would say you want to be at 180 minus your age, and this is considered your max aerobic heart rate, plus or minus 5 beats depending on your current state of health. I would say for most people it should be minus 5 beats initially. So figure that out. So for me, if I'm 45, okay, my max aerobic heart rate would be not exceeding about 135 beats per minute. So you do want to take a heart rate monitor with you when you're doing this. If you really want to get into the zone properly, that's a good way to track it. Because the thing is what Dr. Maffetone said is as soon as we even go little bits above that initially, that we already start to trigger burning sugar, and that process then can linger for up to 72 hours. So this idea of kind of blended exercise where we do like aerobic and then we do the high intensity and then it doesn't work properly, because you have to get your body first a very solid aerobic base. And you'll see like highly trained athletes that have even like that could be like triathletes, And if you actually got them, they are used to cruising most of the time at, say, maybe a heart rate that's like 150 or 155. And maybe they should actually be more like 140. And so the problem is that they can be very efficient at doing that, and just because of the amount of exercise they're doing, they might still be fairly lean, but they're creating a ton of damage to their body over time, and they're staying in an inflammatory state. And once that exercise starts to slow down a little bit, they might run into troubles with because they've basically trained their body to be just effective at burning sugar. So how this would be is that you usually look at 8 weeks of building up an aerobic base. And it's really cool because when you do it, you might find at first it says, okay, I'm going to go for a hike through the conservation area. And I'm going to track my heart rate, and I'm going to go for an hour, and I'm going to make sure that I keep my heart rate somewhere around that 130 to 135 zone. And as I'm doing stuff, if I start to find that it's starting to go 136, 137, I need to slow it right down. That might mean I need to just like stand. It might mean I need to just move really slowly for a bit. But the whole thing is doing exercise and keeping it in that zone, which can be really frustrating for people initially that are used to cruising at a heart rate of 155 or 160 or something like that and feeling okay with it. It's going to feel like you're not working out. But what will happen as you do it is eventually you start to find that now you can actually become more efficient. And now you can actually start to do more exercise and more intensity, but staying in the same aerobic zone, right? So you're training your aerobic capacity to be, rather than like this, you're training it to be like this, right? And that's where all of your fat burning potential stems from. Then when we start to incorporate some of the higher intensity stuff here and there, rather than starting from here and then going into it, you're starting here and then you start to come into it up top. So you get so many more benefits from it. How, if you're not monitoring, how you can kind of think about it is a talk test. You should be able to carry on a conversation with your partner when you're staying in a proper aerobic zone. You should be able to breathe through your nose the entire time. As soon as you start to find that you can't breathe through your nose, you're probably out of your aerobic zone. Also, what I like about breathing through your nose is it's a great way to stimulate that rest and digest part of the nervous system too. So you'll constantly be kind of stimulating that. You should finish your workout feeling energetic with a good mood. Your appetite should be controlled and no soreness or heavy fatigue. I don't know about you, but when I've done some really intense exercises in too long, my appetite sometimes is huge. Because if I've been running in this for a long time, I am creating huge sugar cravings or carbohydrate cravings, however you want to do it. I mean, I remember training triathlon stuff, and I'd be done, and it's like I would want to have like muffins and whatever, and I'd earned it at that point because I'd just done a whole bunch of mileage. So, but I'm just setting myself up for the same cycle over and over and over again. Does that make sense? So the FASTER study. This was a study that was done with, what does this stand for? It's like fat adapted something for elite runners. They basically looked at a bunch of elite runners. Has anybody heard of this study? Looked at a bunch of elite runners, and they wanted to look at the difference between a standard higher carb diet that most of these types of athletes are on versus a low carb diet that was primarily calories from fat. So they were trying to see is that if they could get an athlete to become very fat adapted already, how efficient are they at burning fat? And also, how successful can they be in it? How much can they compete at the same level? But what we're looking at for fat is, prior to this, the current science says that absolute maximum amount of fat that an athlete can burn is upwards of around 1 gram per minute. And most people do not make it that high either. Most highly trained athletes falling into the 0.45 to 0.75 grams. For moderate athletes, about 0.41, and for lower performance athletes, about 0.27. It's a pretty big range, okay? And this is what they thought was the max that could be done prior to this study. This study blew this away, and they actually came close to burning almost double that. So the results of the faster study showed that the high carb diet group was burning more or less similar to what it stated that they expected. But the group that was doing the low carb diet that was really fat adapted was burning up to almost 2 times as much fat, up to about 1.8 grams of fat per minute. And the lowest of the group that was in the low carb diet was burning about 1.1 gram per minute, which was still above what they actually thought was even possible max before. So if we can train our bodies to be fat adapted through diet, and then we go and start to incorporate fat adapted exercise by keeping in a good aerobic zone and gradually stretching that out, because what will happen as you do it is you'll find that you cannot go very fast without staying in your zone. But as you keep training, you will find that all of a sudden you can do more and more and more and more work within the same aerobic zone. You can go faster and still be in the right heart rate. And that is so beneficial for overall health to be able to do that. But I thought this study was fascinating just to see how much more potential we can burn fat when we train the body in the right way. So the other thing that happens with aerobic exercise, we increase the size and the number of mitochondria. Mitochondria are energy-producing factories in the body. So this is also going to help us make more energy. We're going to become more efficient at our sport or at our exercise. We'll improve our performance. We need to have mitochondria to burn fat, okay, because it incorporates oxygen. And the more mitochondria we have, it also helps us to protect against oxidative stress, which is one of the precursors to just about whole chronic disease along with inflammation. The Copenhagen study looked at what do we need to do to really get all of these benefits. And they were saying we need to do around 2 to 3 runs a week, totaling a total of 1 to 2.5 hours, gives you a 44% reduction in mortality compared to people that don't do it. That's huge. I mean, gosh, you cannot manufacture a pharmaceutical that would have that kind of benefit. And that's not significant. So 2 to 3 times, that could be running, that could be walking, okay? It's basically moving your body in your aerobic zone for an hour a week. Not that crazy, not that hard. The key is training it so that we get into this state. And I would encourage everybody to try it and see what you can do. I think it's kind of fun to see, like, when does my heart rate come up and when can I get it down, and when can I start to go do the same thing. Like if I find that I've got a loop that I can stay at 135 beats for, and it takes me X amount of time to get through that loop, staying in that zone, as I progress, I should find I'm getting through there faster and faster and faster as I'm increasing my aerobic zone. So the black hole, this is where most people run into. This is considered vigorous but not brutal. It's too slow to make you better, but it's too fast to allow sufficient recovery. So it's the worst place to be training it. And it will genetically train your body to use sugar and not fat. Bad, bad, bad. We don't want to get into that zone. It trains your body to prefer sugar and not fat for up to 72 hours. So every time we dip into that, because it's right on that anaerobic threshold, so we just start to go into burning sugars, which takes us out of fat, but then it triggers that process to go on for a period of time after. And the problem with it is usually this black hole area is for too long of a time, okay? So we end up staying in it for just a little bit too long. It's a little too frequent. We sort of never get out of the cycle of it. And this is when I talk about chronic cardio. So when people go out and do lots of chronic cardio, whether they're doing lots of running or lots of cycling or whatever it might be, or lots of CrossFit or any of this kind of stuff, over a period of time, you're going to find that it's just your workout's a little bit too long, a little bit too hard, a little too frequent, and not enough rest between them. And rest is really, really crucial part. It's just as important as the exercise component. It stresses the body. When you go into anaerobic metabolism, you create stress, okay? It's part of what happens in that system. And we want to be able to use it for its benefits, but not too much. If we do it too much, we get all the negative parts. So when our body gets stressed, that triggers higher cortisol levels. That has global effects in our body. Cortisol is a primary stress hormone. Creates breakdown of tissues. If we're in stress state all the time, we're constantly breaking down tissues. It also then sets the stage for inflammation, prevents the body from burning fat, and it sets the stage for injury and cardiovascular disease. They would actually look at marathon runners, and some marathon runners, if they finished the race and then they went in and got a bunch of lab tests done, they walked right into the ER and got that, they would actually look from their inflammatory markers like an HSCRP and a troponin test. You would actually look like they were having a myocardial infarction.
How bad is it to, so they talk about the 1 to 2.5 hours at the aerobic,
Yeah.
right, at the aerobic level. So what if you did 15 minutes of aerobics and what if you're doing an exercise where you're not staying exactly in the zone for an extended period of time, but you
72 hours, if you dip into anaerobic, you'll be triggering burning sugar.
But even if you go lower though, I mean.
If you go lower, you're still better off.
You're still better off, but how bad does it affect, I guess, the fat burn?
Well, first of all is building that aerobic base. So I would say, if you talk to most people, I was listening to somebody a while ago, I can't remember who, and they were talking about all of this stuff, and it was on a podcast. And he was saying, I don't know, and he wasn't sure about how all this worked, but he was just talking in general. He was a pretty fit guy, and he was like, all I know is that when I incorporate walking regularly into my routine, I'm leaner. Always leaner. And I think it's because you're just increasing. Walking is one of the best ways. Our bodies are actually designed more for walking and moving and lifting and doing different things in shorter spurts. We're not really designed to run long distances. So I think that's just something we've kind of incorporated. But I think a lot of times walking, if you're doing walking and you're incorporating the diet component of it, I think that's a great place to start. Personally, there's sometimes where that's the only exercise I get is really walking with a baby strapped to my chest. And then I might incorporate a couple of interval types of things that we'll talk about in a bit. Because you don't have to do lots. Once you get into the zone for it, you don't have to do tons of stuff for it to still work well. But yeah, that was really interesting when they would look at some of the marathon runners. It looked like they just had a heart attack. Now they can recover fairly quickly from that, but it just shows you what kind of damage has gone on. And it leaves you tired, exhausted, and with no energy. And these are the people that I see when they are going from, I've got a tendonitis in my elbow, and then I've got a tendonitis in my shoulder, and now my hip's all sore. And it's like you're going from one injury to another because you're not giving your body a chance to recuperate. And they're also the ones that it's the hardest to try and get them to change it because you become addicted to the endorphin rush we get from training in this zone. You train in this zone and you will feel good. You feel good. You feel like you gave it a good effort and you worked hard. And you feel like you earned your meal. And you feel like you're burning stuff, but you're creating downstream problems.
Those Nike commercials, going red and sweating and
Yeah. Well, you look at, I'll talk about that in a sec. Strength training. So outside of aerobic exercise, which think of aerobic exercise as being your bread and butter. That is the bulk of what you want to establish. That's the most important thing for overall longevity, health, burning fat, is getting a good aerobic base, which you will find. Give yourself about 8 weeks of really challenging it. Try and incorporate. Now, some people, if people are runners, you could do more than 2 or 3 times a day. Is anybody more of a runner or a cyclist or anything like that? If people want to, they could do more. You can do more of that for 5 times a week or something if people like to run, but it's staying in that aerobic capacity. And there's this constant feedback with our bodies as far as how am I feeling? If you're feeling tired and exhausted, you have to pay attention to it. And if 5 is too much, then go down to 3 and see how you feel at that. But the whole thing is the aerobic exercise should not be hard on the body. It's training the body to become more efficient. So generally, after you've started to build up an aerobic base, then I would incorporate strength training. And the reason is because you just get more bang for your buck. If you have a really big aerobic threshold, then anytime you add something onto it, you're just able to burn more fat as your fuel source. Okay? So it's excellent for building strength, power, stamina, and muscles to prevent injury. It's really an essential part of also what we're designed to do. We're designed to lift and push and do all these different things. Improves proprioception and balance. It increases size of the number of mitochondria in another way different from how aerobic exercise works. So this combination of doing aerobic and strength training and anaerobic all mixed together can work really well, but it has to be done properly. It definitely improves fat burning because you get this hormonal push. When you do strength training properly, you will get testosterone and growth hormone that surges significantly. And those are really your anti-aging hormones. You know, a lot of times if people are low in testosterone, they are going to have lots of musculoskeletal injuries. Testosterone is what helps your body deal with injuries. It helps your body, it prevents injuries, it builds lean muscle mass, which is your metabolic fat-burning fuel. If you don't have enough of that, I mean, outside of our motivation and our sex drive and all these other things that testosterone does, growth hormone is considered the panacea of anti-aging hormones. And both of these all start to decline after around 30-ish. So they steadily decline. So we're all going to be a little lower, but if we do the right things, we can actually modulate them right back up. And some people can have higher testosterone in their 60s than they did when they were in their 30s if they're doing things properly. And the diet stuff plays into this too. When you're incorporating things like intermittent fasting, that's a great way to jack this up. It's a great way to build up your growth hormone. Generally, strength training, I'm going to go through two different things, but generally you would look at lower reps and high resistance if you're in good condition. So if people are used to doing weight training, then you can do more kind of explosive power kind of weight training. But really you should be doing it if you are familiar with it, if you have no injuries, if you are have good energy, your sleep's going proper, like you've got everything there, because otherwise it is very possible to damage yourself. Otherwise, I think some general everyday exercises that everybody can incorporate are good body weight ones like push-ups, pull-ups, squats, and planks. When you get used to doing this, this could be something that you could incorporate every day even, okay? Or I might even incorporate it maybe 3 times a week or something along those lines. And generally, you'd want it to be able to work yourself up to doing this. For a male, for push-ups, we should be able to get up to around 50 push-ups. Pull-ups should be about 12, squats should be about 50, and we should be able to hold a plank for about 2 minutes. For women, it should be about 20 push-ups, 5 pull-ups, 50 squats, 2-minute plank. That would be where I would go to. And what you would do is if you're not there initially, you do them in mini spurts. So it's like, say I'm going to do push-ups and I'm doing full regular push-ups and I get to 10 and I'm starting to conk out. I want to get to 10, then I want to rest for a bit. I might rest for 30 seconds, 20 seconds, 40 seconds, depending on what I need to be able to then go back and give a full-blown effort again. And as soon as that dies off, rest again for a bit, and then do it. Doing the mini spurts back and forth rather than just going to complete. So you're kind of taking yourself to exhaustion, rest for a bit, give a max effort again, rest for a bit, max effort again, rest a bit. The other way that you can incorporate when you're doing things like these or any of them is modify them. If push-ups are really hard initially, start doing 50 wall push-ups. Once you've done that, then do more of a incline push-up, okay, where you're kind of on an incline doing it. And then eventually you get down to a regular push-up. Maybe you start with your knees on the ground. Whatever it takes, but the whole thing is gradually this would be a good set point that you'd want to be able to build yourself up to.
And then it doesn't matter because you built the aerobic base if your aerobic build.
During these periods, it's fine because it's not part of your aerobic training. And sometimes what they would even do is you'd take breaks sometimes from, well, I don't necessarily take a break from the aerobic training because I think you can incorporate that all the time once you've got a good base. But then when you do this periodically for short periods, it's actually very adaptive in another way. It's more the chronic cardio stuff that's dipping into those zones that creates a lot of problems. Because you're not getting all the hormonal benefits from it either, right? From this type of stuff, you do get all the hormonal benefits. Sprints. Has anybody ever incorporated sprints or high-intensity interval types of training? I love these, and I think that these are actually probably one of the most effective ways to really burn fat again. But again, you need to develop your aerobic base. You need to make sure you're injury-free, and you have to do them properly when you do them. Because otherwise, you can hurt yourself. I mean, if you look at like the, in the Olympics and look at like the 100-meter dash guys. First of all, they're shredded. There's like no leftover fat on them because when you're sprinting, genetically, having any excess body weight to do a sprint is not beneficial. So when you start to train your body to do sprints, you really turn on genes to actually burn fat very effectively. But if an athlete, you ever see them, if they are the slightest twinge of something not being right, like their hamstring feels a little off, or they feel something twinge, they're done. They just tap out and they don't even compete. They won't even risk it because it is so easy to kind of hurt yourself if you're doing full on out, like everything. When you're doing sprints, you're full out, okay? So when you start to incorporate something like this, hugely beneficial, but move yourself up to it. So sprints would be all out short duration exercise, extremely fat burning. They leads to genetic adaptations to burn fat, and it lowers your perceived exertion with other exercise. I don't know about you, but when you do sprints, when I've done sprints, when I do regular exercise, it feels really easy. My idea of what hard feels like, I've just expanded my boundaries substantially. I remember going to Japan I went to Japan for about 3 months to train martial arts back when I was like 18. And they're known for doing speed training. And we were kind of warned before we went. It was like, just get ready because the training's a little different. And now, we didn't follow all of these principles but that's not really the goal. The goal is trying to make you mentally tough and break your body down and everything. But you go in there and you do speed training. So you'd be up and down the floor. And I remember the instructor in the front, and his count would be like, ich, ni, san, chi, go, rock, chi, chach, ku, ju. And you'd be like, moving like, and at first you're like all over the place because you can't keep up. But after about 2 weeks, your body completely adapts. And then somebody new comes in to train, and you feel like you're moving like the Flash, and they feel like they're so slow. Give them 2 weeks, and they're about the same as you are again. So you would adapt to it very well once you start to do it. But I remember it being the most physically exhausting thing. I remember the first 10 minutes of the class thinking I was going to die, and the class was an hour long, and it didn't stop. But after doing that, my concept of what my body was actually able to do and what felt like hard exercise completely changes, which is a really great thing for life in general because your concept of what's hard, you know you can get through stuff, right? It's awesome hormonal benefits. It's probably one of the best things to increase these. They showed that even doing one 30-second sprint increased growth hormone 560%.
30 seconds is a long time.
I usually do them by about 15 seconds would be my sprints usually.
Yeah, 30 seconds is like running.
The max you would do it would be about 30 seconds. That's about the max that you can hold a sprint. I find that's even often too long. But the literature would say it would be about that long. So you're creating a short-term fight or flight stimulation that elicits this flood of adaptive hormones into the bloodstream, primarily this testosterone and growth hormone. And this is going to bump up your energy, it improves oxygenation to the brain, you burn more fat, increases focus and vitality, and it also sets the stage up for tissue repair and recovery. The key is that it is short, adaptive periods. So you also improve resilience to physical and psychological fatigue when performing longer durations, like I was talking about. So, and again, anytime we start to play with this and we can reprogram our genes, we just make it easier on ourselves. It's like, I feel like so many times we're doing some stuff kind of right and a lot of stuff kind of wrong, and we're training the body to actually become less efficient over time. And then when we start to do more stuff wrong, we just feel like it's a lost cause, and then we just go and eat donuts. because it's kind of like, what's the sense, right? But the thing is that if you can line up the pieces and get your body to become more efficient, you can get away with doing a lot less and things just work better. It's like if I can eventually train my body to really become efficient at burning fat by getting a good aerobic base, eating a kind of diet that's going to make me burn fat more efficiently, and then incorporate a little bit of exercise like strength training and sprints to really kind of hammer home the genes to do that, then I can get away with not having to do as much, and my body will just become more efficient at using fat as an energy source rather than sugars.
So Jason, when you say sprints, are you for X amount? Because if you can't, so I know it says if you're injury free.
Yeah, so I'll give you a couple options.
Okay.
So yes, on this, physically, this would be the best way to probably do it if you're not injured, would be go out to the track and sprint full out for 100 meters, and then probably walk for 100 meters, then sprint full out for 100 meters. Or sometimes I might do a little bit of a switch, or I might sprint full out for 100 meters, and then I might kind of from there go into a bit of a jog, a bit of a walk, then work up to it and do it again. The whole thing is, it's like, usually between sprints, you want to give yourself a rest period. But if you give yourself too much of a rest period, you lose some of the benefits. And if you don't give yourself enough rest period and you go into it fatigued, you're not getting all the benefits from it. So usually it amounts to usually somewhere between about 30 seconds to a minute of rest, because you're only doing really full out, probably between 10 to 20 seconds of a sprint. And you would do probably about 5 cycles of that. So I mean, how much is that? Like, you know, a minute and a half of hard exercise, that's it. But it gives you tons of benefits downstream because of what it sets the stage up for. And more is not better. Going out and doing sprints every day is going to cause your body to go totally break down because it's a huge stressor on it. Anything we do, we have to create a stressor, then we have to step back and we have to let our bodies kind of recover and repair, and so that we can then put a full effort out again. If we go into doing sprints in a pre-fatigue state, we're also again screwing ourselves, because what happens is when we interact with the environment in any way, we're training our bodies to react appropriately. If I am training my body to try to do the best it can when I'm at 80%, then it's going to become more efficient at me being at 80%. Right? If I'm down at 70% and I'm kind of tired and I'm a little bit injured, but I'm going out and I'm going to do it anyways, I'm really just becoming more efficient at my body being at 70%. So you're better off to rest, come into it. When you should feel when you do sprints, you should be like, all right, here we go, I'm ready. Like that's what you want to feel like when you do it. And then you go out and give it a good full effort. And then you take a good long break, which might be 7 to 10 days before you do it again.
Walking and do that like in 5 reps?
Yeah, that would be probably a pretty good way to do it. Now, if you are doing sprints like this, where you're running and it's high impact, I would do them probably 1 every week to 10 days is about all you need to do. If you are doing a much lower impact type of, like a swim, if you're doing a full-on out swim, or you're doing a bike speed trial or something along those lines that really doesn't have a lot of impact, you could do that more often. So maybe you might incorporate that 2 or 3 times over the course of 7 or 10 days, right? But it's not the kind of thing that you're doing every day. And a lot of times we get caught up into doing intervals. Like, there's a lot of classes now where people will go and it's like they're fun. Like even something like Zumba or something like that can be a fun class to go and do, but you're pretty much training almost the whole time in that black hole period. So you're not really getting your body in the zone that you want it to be long term. You either need to be going slower than you think you need to be going, and then have little intermixed periods of high intensity, full on out for short durations, and then rest. Go back into your aerobic kind of exercising, a little slower than you'd like to go, and then eventually then you go back into doing high intensity sprints, and you incorporate some of this strength training throughout too. So sprinting, you have to do a proper warm-up, because think about getting out of your car, lining up, you're going to hurt yourself. So you should be doing a proper warm-up initially. Which doesn't mean lots, but it means get some mobility going. You should get your body feeling a little bit warm. You might even get a tiny bit of a sweat going. Everything should be ready to go. Short durations, 15 to 30 seconds in length, followed by rest period. Then repeat. 30 seconds to a minute rest period. 5 times, depending on ability to put forth a similar effort and time. This is key. If I've rested 30 seconds and I go again and I'm like, oh my gosh, say I'm running the length of a field and I can get to the end of the field and it takes me 12 seconds. If the next time I do it, I'm like, okay, I'm at 15 seconds, I need to rest longer. Or that's the end of my sprint training, I'm done. Or I do a shorter length that I'm going to do. You want to try and make sure that your 5 times should be fairly similar effort and time. Okay? If you're on a bike, you should be able to get to the same RPMs for the same period of time and then bring it back down. If you're finding that each time you're doing it, you're dropping too much, that's not the goal of it. The sprints need to be a short duration, maximal effort. And then you should follow with a nice cool down as well. Again, don't just finish and then hop in your car and drive home. Play. This is like, you know, when you're on the beach, throw the frisbee around. Do something like ultimate frisbee. Go surfing if you can, if you're traveling somewhere. Play sports with your kids. Like, it's have fun and move your body just in lots of different ways. One of the problems with routine exercise is that we train our body to just keep doing the same thing over and over and over again. And the body is not designed to do that. It's designed to be adaptable. It's designed to do lots of different things and move in different ways. And we have to do that. It also intellectually keeps us flexible and mobile and spontaneous. So have fun with things, incorporate stuff. Try and do different types of sports. I mean, even at home, sometimes what we'll do, we'll make like little obstacle courses every once in a while at home. And we'll try and recruit my 12-year-old to get in there and do stuff with us and tag off and do different pieces. Like, play with it a little bit, you know? Whatever you can to try and incorporate fun into your life and play into exercise is hugely beneficial. I mean, I love it. I'll go out and play basketball with my 12-year-old. And it's awesome. It's like I get a nice fun workout. Mind you, I need to check my pulse because I'm sure I'm getting way up there. But sometimes that is a little different because it might play a little bit more into the benefits of play. So take home. Overall health, fat loss and overall health include diet that helps to promote fat burning, aerobic exercise base, which is your bread and butter, staying at that 180 minus your heart rate plus or minus 5 beats.
Was that 65% of that?
Max heart rate. Max heart rate is 220 minus your age.
Oh, okay.
Yeah. So the other way, you'll find that they'll actually very similar. If you do max heart rate at 220 minus your age, or 65% of that, you'll find that it will equal very closely to 180 minus your heart rate plus or minus. Yeah. God that we got that one done. You'd be going, man, I'm going at like, you're like, I just have to sit. I'm in my max aerobic zone, and I'm just sitting. Give yourself about 8 weeks to see how you can build your aerobic threshold. Incorporate weight training. You can do the baseline training daily once you get fat adapted. Otherwise, start with about 1 to 2 times a week, but you can progress that into more. I'll sometimes, and it doesn't have to be a series. You don't have to do all of them all the time. There might be times where you might decide to pump off, 20 squats while you're waiting for the kettle to go. Or if I have my bar up here, I might walk by and decide to just do a few pull-ups in between. I kind of incorporate that sometimes into play. But the general idea with weight training is it should be to a maximal effort too. It shouldn't be... The problem with weight training is when it becomes blended exercise where now you're doing high repetitions, lower weight. That becomes a problem because all you're doing is training yourself in that black hole again. So, like curves. I love the idea of getting out and moving, but you're not really training yourself to be in the most beneficial state for burning fat and overall health long term. Sprints, if running sprints can incorporate one time every 7 to 10 days, if non-weight bearing then can do more often, depending on how you feel, what your energy is like, are you sleeping well, do you have any injuries, all of those kind of things you have to constantly be playing into. And like they said, for both of these ones, for sprints and weight training, you should feel like you want to do it. You should feel up for it and excited to do it. That's kind of a piece of it too, is playing with it enough where it becomes fun to do it and kind of exciting to do it. Not just like, oh God, I gotta go and do my 5 sets of sprints today. If that's what's going on, then you're better off to go and do an aerobic exercise at that point, you know, and build up until you're kind of feeling ready to do it. Lots of rest in between, play and have fun, trying different activities. That covers everything that I wanted to talk about around exercise. So, does anybody have any questions?
Yes. I'm seeing a naturopath for a journal because my cortisol levels are very, very high, but I'm also having a very low deficiency in iron. So, like, I'm exhausted pretty much all the time. I've been in an excessive fitness regime where I train with a trainer twice a week, and then I'm going to the gym about 4 times a week, and it's like at least 165 beats per minute.
Yeah, you're going to aggravate your adrenal fatigue.
And that's the thing. So I'm kind of like, now where do I begin? Do I
Start with aerobic.
just,
You should do your 8 weeks of aerobic-based training.
just
I'd let it all go. You got to remember too, anytime you're not in aerobic and you go into anaerobic, which you're probably doing with your trainer all the time. I mean, most trainers aren't going to tell you all of this stuff either. Like, most of them are doing specific kind of programs. It's like, here's what works, let's do this. But they're not necessarily looking at the whole picture, and especially they're not going to necessarily understand the dynamics of adrenal fatigue anyways. You shouldn't be doing weight training at this point. You shouldn't be doing sprints at this point. You should be doing aerobic-based training, which turns on your parasympathetic nervous system and turns off your sympathetic fight or flight.
okay.
Because the more you're in sympathetic fight or flight, you are putting yourself in breakdown mode. You're turning on cortisol. So if you're trying to get out of adrenal fatigue, you need to get into rest and digest mode the vast majority of time.
Okay.
It happens a lot. And it's like when people are stressed, exercise helps them de-stress.
Mm-hmm.
And so they like it, and they get a bit of an endorphin rush when you do it. So you do feel kind of good for a bit. But it's not long-term fixing it. It's creating a long-term problem. And it's going to put you more in the hole, and it won't do you any benefits down the road on kind of genetically turning on fat-burning metabolism.
Yes, because I'm very frustrated because I've got the diet down pat, but I have a scale that measures weight and my muscle and fat, and I'm noticing I'm starting to lose my muscle. I told her already, like,
Yeah.
I'm weight training pretty hard. So yeah, don't worry about that.
Well,
I'll come later.
think about it this way. When your body is in anaerobic metabolism, okay, you're in that black hole area. It is much harder to burn fat.
Right.
Your body needs to burn sugar, and if it can't burn enough sugar and you use up all your sugar, it will start to burn proteins. Okay? Proteins are easier for it to turn into sugar than it is to turn and use another system to burn fat. So most times what happens is, and then even if what'll happen is then even if you start to do like fasting and stuff, your body may actually still try to break down proteins because it's not efficient at burning fats. No, you just have to retrain it. You just have to retrain it. So it's like you dial in your diet so you become fat adapted that way as best as you can. You train your body to get used to burning fats.
Okay.
I would give it exogenous fats too, like MCT to oils. I would use something like a brain octane or something like that it's a very fast burning MCT that gets turned into energy very quickly. It helps your body, reminds your body how to burn fats more efficiently. So I would do something like that in the morning so that's all your body's getting is fats in the morning of some sort. You might also do well to incorporate a bit of a collagen powder or something just to kind of help with tissue repair, and it's not going to really pull you out of burning fat. But I would do something like that, and then I would just get out of the black hole because you're probably spending most of your time in the black hole. And if your body is is already stressed, and depending, so you don't have adrenal fatigue, you've got adrenal excess if your cortisol levels are high, right?
Yeah.
So you're probably going to eventually go into adrenal fatigue, but right now your cortisol is way up here. So the last thing you need is to...
I'm in adrenal fatigue first.
Was your cortisol high or low?
It's very high.
High?
Yeah.
Yeah, but what I'm saying is if it's high, you're not in fatigue yet. Adrenal fatigue means your cortisol's dropped.
Okay.
You'll go through 4 phases. Initially, what'll happen is your cortisol comes up, and then the next time your cortisol stays up, and then your DHEA comes up too, which is another stress hormone to balance it out. Third stage is DHEA crashes, cortisol's still high. Fourth phase, they both crash, and they're both low. So you're probably, you're either in any of the first 3 stages. But so yeah, it's not a hard thing to fix. I mean, it requires, for exercise-wise, it means you have to change what you're doing. And you're probably going to mentally not like the feel of it because...
I am going to feel like I'm not working.
Yeah, and you have to give yourself some time to let your body get readapted, right? And then you can, once you start to do that for a bit, then you'd be better off to incorporate little bursts of this exercise that's adaptive for you, but not going to be breaking you down. If you're getting injuries, you're not in the right zone.
Okay, I am.
Yeah. So, but that's all workable. And then outside of that, it's like, incorporate some meditation. I would do heart rate variability monitoring. I would do stuff to retrain your nervous system to get back into the right zone.